Say it after me. A station shouldn't exist for a special few, but rather for as many people as possible.
Hi, I'm Andy.
And I'm Roger,
And welcome to The Middle,
where we try to have thoughtful conversations
about awkward topics.
on our search to find the middle.
We're going to give you last week's news today. That's
a slogan. We should put that on a t-shirt.
Stop touching her!
I am tonight announcing my candidacy.
Taylor Swift.
Look, my biggest issue with marriage is that I think that it's a fundamentally flawed institution that is built on the oppression of women.
I will not be lectured about sexism and misogyny.
Having truly rational conversations about controversial issues is risky these days.
Andy, how you doing?
well, thanks, Roger. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad. Well, there's been a lot in the news lately about housing, and from our situation, I'm actually in the market to try to find somewhere to live. I'm with my parents at the moment, so we thought it would be a really good idea to dive a little bit deeper into this. And I think that we had a bit of inspiration from an unlikely source amongst YouTube. So I was wondering whether you could take our listeners through that.
Yeah, so I was sitting outside, and my son, he's 11, as our listeners would know. He's listening to a YouTube video about strodes. Now, I don't know if our listeners would know what a strode is, but essentially it is like this really undesirable combination of a street, which also has to serve like the purpose of, a key transport corridor within Sydney, right? And it's just this like it's like the worst of both worlds, right? And normally I get a lot of stick from you, Roger, about letting my son watch so much YouTube. And I often use this video as an example of why I think YouTube's good, because he was watching planning videos about planning, videos about Sydney and all of the challenges, the contemporary challenges that Sydney faces. So we have on today the YouTuber who prepared that video, Sharath Mahendra. And just to give you a little bit of context to this guy has had more views of his channel than both the AFL and NRL grand finals. So we're very honoured to have you here today.
I have, really. I didn't even know that.
So well done. Congratulations. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your channel, how it came about? And maybe we'll kick off that way.
Yeah, not a problem. So I'm Sharath, and I'm the creator of the YouTube channel Building Beautifully. So that's it's pretty much a city planning YouTube channel that's kind of all about transport and urban planning in the city of Sydney, mostly. I've done a few videos elsewhere. I did a bit about Melbourne, something about Singapore, something about Hong Kong, but for the most part, Sydney. And kind of just Andy's put it pretty well, pretty much the challenges that Sydney has faced over the decades and how we're trying to kind of dig ourselves out of the hole we've created.
First of all, Andy, I think that this is the kind of good side of YouTube that you've been preaching to me about, right? Because Sharath, when we had this conversation about YouTube, I was just saying how when I am a silent observer on my young kids and my cousins and things watching this, and they're all kind of under the age of 10, I've got to say that there's some worrying stuff on there from a parent's point of view, but I wish there was more kind of channels and content that like yours that you're creating, and less of this talking overlays on Minecraft with all this trash talking.
It's an interesting website, I think. I never actually watched that side of YouTube. I've always been on. I like to watch kind of the educational stuff more, and I'm not trying to be pretentious or anything. Like, you can watch whatever you want on YouTube. I know it's different for kids, but if you're an adult, you watch whatever you want. But yeah, I've always liked these kind of educational videos, and that's kind of how I started. I saw a lot of channels that were doing this type of thing, but in America, there's a lot of urban planning channels in America. Every urban planning YouTuber has talked about Houston at one point or another. And I just thought, we can talk about it in Sydney because it's important to bring an Australian perspective to the table, and I think that's what I kind of love about what I do.
Yeah, something that we love about what we do as well, where we can actually take some of the Australian culture and the things that really matter to us and have a look at it. And I think people get a kick out of that, right? I think that people don't realize, online, they're looking for that relatability. And when you see, oh, I go there, or that's part of my work commute. Exactly. It really resonates with people, right? And I think we've been constantly undersold this as Australians, that our popular content, our popular TV is always a bit lesser, to the Americans and the Europeans. And I think that's really changing, and that's why I love seeing some of this more local YouTube stuff. Sharath, I also know that you're a local boy growing up in West Penny Hills, and which really excited me as well, because I've grown up in Cherrybrook, so we're next door neighbours.
There you go. I've met a lot of people from like Cherrybrook. I swear Cherrybrook's a very common place for people to be from. That's pretty crazy. Yeah, I think I've met a lot of fans who like that my channel is a local channel. They enjoy, pretty much what you said, Roger. They enjoy being able to actually see the places that they enjoy being able to see a lot of the places that they've been before, and kind of getting a Sydney perspective on that. Like, oh, Beecroft Road in Epping, it's terrible, but now I understand why it's terrible. Or now I understand, why Victoria Road through West Ryde is such a bad road. Now I understand why the Rozelle interchange is such a nightmare. Now I understand why Australians hate apartments. I like to try and educate people on those topics, I guess.
Absolutely. And on just even more of a mirrored approach of your life, growing up in West Penny Hills and growing up in Cherrybrook, my sister, who is actually 6 years older than me, went to James Roos as well. And so,
there you go.
Yeah, and just there obviously there's a whole episode there about the culture of getting ready for the selective school tests, what it's like to be at a high achieving school like James Roos. That's an interesting piece as well. Generations apart.
How long ago was that?
Yeah, so it's got about 22 years on you. So a different generation. I think that the tests and the entry,
like, 1990 or something, is it?
Yeah, the tests have become progressively harder, and I think that we always use that, the whole, being Asian myself, we like to play on the race thing, and I think the good example here to hold up to the public was James Roos at that time in the 90s was still only a third Asian and 2/3 Caucasian, and I believe now it's it's slither. It's like spot the white guy is what I understand.
Yeah, and that's not innately a problem, I guess, that there's so few Caucasians, but I think the problem with James Roos, and look, I really enjoyed my time at James Roos, but in retrospect, it kind of gives you a very skewed image of the world, like in a world where doctors and lawyers are like the richest and happiest people, and everyone else is just miserable and poor. I reckon it's kind of the image that you kind of create. And of course, that varies depending on the student you are. I think there even within James Roos, there are different bubbles and different people. But I was definitely in the bubble where I was like, if I don't become a doctor, I will fail at life. Yeah. Everything I've done my whole life will have been for nothing. And yeah.
Although increasingly, as we'll get in today, it is probably only doctors and lawyers that will be able to afford to buy a house in Sydney if current trends continue.
But hopefully they don't. Yeah.
But maybe to kick off, because I mean we do want to have a bit of a focus on housing in this episode. I'm going to kick off with a hopefully a softball for you, which is, can you tell us what is a YIMBY?
Oh, that is a softball. A YIMBY stands for Yes in My Backyard. So basically, we are defenders of housing and of housing abundance. We're advocates for housing abundance in this city. YIMBYs believe that we need more housing, we need more transport. They say yes to things. Instead of saying, no, we don't want that tower there, we say, yes, we do want that tower there, and why don't you build 5 more while you're at it, For too long, this city has been ruled by NIMBYs, people who don't want things to be built, because there's this perception in Australia, and I'm willing to kind of talk more about this as we go on, but there's this weird obsession with the idea that apartments are for third world countries, for Hong Kong, which isn't a third world country, mind you, but if you ask some people, they'll talk about it like it is. Apartments are for places like Hong Kong and like India and like all those like far away poor countries. And these are not my words. These are kind of the perceptions that I know exist in Australians, because I've read the comments on my YouTube videos and I've seen what people think. For too long, people have said no, and YIMBYs say yes instead. And we're trying to really change the conversation in this city and really make people more open-minded about living in something a little bit different to a detached house.
Yeah, I think I've seen. I'm at the age now where I've transitioned through a lot of different housing situations. I've I've rented in an apartment in the inner city. I've been in medium density. I've bought an apartment. I've sold an apartment. I've moved out to the suburbs and crushed my commute. And then I've sold the house, and now I'm back at the parents. And so I've kind of seen it all. And actually, one of the interesting things about watching a few of your videos in the last 24 hours is how the message is received by older generations, which essentially we need to kind of influence from a YIMBY movement, I suppose, right? And I'm really keen to understand, Sharath, where your mentality and the kind of principles around YIMBY have kind of pushed up against the boomer culture or people who are NIMBYs. Do you have any kind of real life examples that you might want to share around how the conversation goes or how you can actually reach people who are entrenched in that mindset?
Yeah, no, not a problem. Well, how the conversation usually goes, it can vary. So older Australians tend to be a little bit less receptive to the idea of building more housing. Now, building more housing it's simpler economics that will help to drive down prices. If you increase supply, you decrease prices. Older Australians don't tend to always understand that, and they tend to already own property, so they're not as invested in getting prices reduced. A lot of them also, I suspect a lot of them live in a bubble and don't realize how much some people are struggling. I mean, of course, if you live in somewhere like Bondi and you own your own place, you probably only interact with people who own their own place, and you probably don't realize how much young Australians are actually struggling. I mean, that's just the simple truth. Now, how the conversation normally goes, well, a few months ago, I went to a council meeting in Mortdale, and basically Mortdale is a suburb on the T4 Eastern Suburbs and Illawarra line, where they've got a bunch of councillors who want to upzone it to 6 stories. Of course, the local community, primarily elder boomers, were not having any of it. They wanted nothing. Their slogan was no more than 4, actually. They didn't want any apartments. Now, how the conversation usually goes was very much reflected at Mortdale. We had people who were saying, young Australians aren't ratepayers, so you should ignore them because they're not paying the council rates. You had older Australians saying, just let them move, all of them move out to Picton. For any listeners who don't know where Picton is, it's about 80 kilometres southwest of Sydney, so it's not a feasible place for people to live. I think there's a perception amongst older Australians that they had to make do when they were younger and they had to move out to the suburbs. So why can't we move out to the suburbs? These Australians don't realise how far the suburbs are now, though. The suburbs are no longer Mortdale or Parramatta or Castle Hill. Those aren't the suburbs anymore. The suburbs are Oran Park, Picton, Marsden Park, Box Hill. These are places that are over 2 hours by public transport away. So why should we young Australians need to make those really long commutes while older Australians, many of them are retired, they get to live in really convenient areas just because they happened to buy a plot of land in 1970 for like 10 grand. I don't think that's very fair. And they might think it's fair, but of course they think it's fair because it benefits them. So at the end of the day, no one really gets to choose what's fair except for the voters. And governments are realizing more and more. I mean, millennials are now the biggest voting population. I'm pretty sure they're bigger than boomers now. I could be wrong. I think there's more millennials now. Zoomers are getting older and older, and Zoomers are going to vote in favor of housing affordability. So I think there is change on the horizon.
I really like the example in one of your videos about the bloke who was a former school teacher, now retired, who couldn't actually afford to live in the suburb that he's trying to defend, the status quo in terms of heritage. And I think that is something that, it does seem fundamentally unfair that, when we spoke sort of in jest earlier around only doctors and lawyers being able to afford to buy in Sydney, but unfortunately that is increasingly becoming the reality. And even people on a 6-figure income are struggling to buy in Sydney.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think it's quite sad that we've gotten to that point. But at the end of the day, you've got to realize we're at that point because Sydney is a beautiful city. Everyone wants to live in Sydney. It's a bit of a paradox because a lot of young Australians like us, we like to joke, oh, no one wants to live in Sydney. It's so expensive. But then if no one wants to live here, why is it so expensive? The truth is we all want to live in this city. It's a beautiful city. It's an amazing place to live. We have great parks. We have great water views. We have an amazing harbour. We have an amazing entertainment and leisure scene. And we have pretty much everything you need in the city, but we just don't have affordable housing. And I think if we can just somehow fix that one thing, then we'll be set. Now, in terms of expensive housing, a lot of Australians can't afford to buy, and I think we need to start accepting that. That might be the road that we go down. We need to start improving renters' rights, because a lot of people are going to start becoming lifelong renters. The aspiration of home ownership is starting to die away. Politicians need to actually work to make renters' rights much better. My girlfriend, for example, she was going to go to a house inspection today. It was cancelled because, it was cancelled and moved to another day that she's not free on. So that's just the type of thing that just happens, of course they can just cancel a house inspection because they know they have like dozens and dozens of people waiting to go. These are the type of things, small things like that should be reformed, make it easier for, renters to report a bad landlord, make it easier for renters to actually be able to afford their rent. I mean, rental assistance should certainly go up. I think I saw a figure yesterday that said they increased it by 15%. They should actually increase it by 40%, because that would, make a sizable difference to most renters. But really what I think, and what we at Sydney YIMBY, and I haven't really talked much about Sydney YIMBY yet, and I'm happy to, but
yeah, please give it a plug.
Yeah, so Sydney YIMBY is a grassroots housing advocacy organisation advocating for abundant housing in Sydney. And pretty much everything I've already talked about in our interview is pretty much what we're advocating for. We're advocating for housing pretty much anywhere next to a train station. And Chris Minns is on our side. He is also agreeing that we need to build more density in this city. He is pushing a program where we rezone up to 30, or I think 31 stations are going to be rezoned across Sydney, if not more, to allow for medium and high-rise apartments. Not everyone in Australia is happy about that, of course, but, there was a poll in the Sydney Morning Herald a few weeks ago that I think 60% of Australians or Sydney-siders are happy to have more density built. So Chris Minns, I think, is on the right side of history here, and I urge him to continue to be on the right side of history and to not back down just because a few older, wealthy boomers are complaining.
Yeah,
like a school teacher. He's not. Is he a boomer? Actually, he might be a bit older. Yeah, continue.
It's a lot of what you said is resonating with me, and my mum always tells this story about when she purchased a plot of land in Cherrybrook. Way back when.
My grandparents live in Cherrybrook, actually. So.
Yeah, and at the time, all her friends, and she came from living in Bondi and stuff. It was a completely different suburb then. Before it was the affluency and the gentrification. But she was ridiculed, saying, "Why are you buying a worthless piece of plot out there? No one's going to want to travel or live that far away from the city." And then fast forward to where we are now, that we've kind of sprawled out here. So she tells that story all the time about how the land in Cherrybrook was seen as worthless. It was just some carved up farm, and it was too far from the city. And why would you bother moving out?
What year was that?
That was probably in the 80s. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. So this is
it would have been farm. It would have been farmland for sure. Yeah.
It is, and most of the roads are actually named after different people on the farm. In the new side of Cherrybrook,
Robert Road.
Yeah, that's right. And yeah, I think that there's this idea of this enduring idea in the boomer culture. That is, you need to pay your dues. You need to sacrifice. And this was our form of sacrifice, and your younger generations have to find a similar kind. So that's something that I hear a lot. And I think that what I'd be keen on understanding, because, the YIMBY movement, and correct me, maybe you do have these mouthpieces, but really it's almost like you need a boomer mouthpiece for this situation, right? Because when they're digesting this message, it's so much easier to hear it from one of their own versus, well, what are all these young kids and Gen Zs now? Of course, they want apartments. They don't have families. They've never had to endure the suffering of a multi-development going literally next door to them. They don't have to do X, Y, Z. They don't have all this responsibility, superannuation, and all this kind of stuff. Have you managed to find some, I suppose, older representatives to almost kind of sugarcoat the?
Yeah, we have. Yeah. Peter Chilop. He is an economist at the Center for
Independent Studies.
Center of what? Independent Studies, is it?
Yes, I believe.
I'm so sorry for listening, Peter. I just forgot what it's called. But yeah, no. So Peter Chilop, he's a older Australian who he's on our side, even though he's got his own place in. Well, I won't dox him, but he has his own place, and yet
There's some laws coming about that, Sharath, so be careful.
Yeah,
oh, yeah, you're going to send a whole boomer army his way.
Yeah, he's on our side. And it's not like every boomer is against us. I mean, I remember reading a few weeks ago that there was a school teacher in, I can't remember what suburb, Roseville or Lindfield or something, who owns 5-bedroom house, and she's happy to sell her piece of land and move on because she recognizes that younger Australians like us, need somewhere to live. Now, now we're kind of moving more into the culture. I think older Australians, and I've observed this a lot, older Australians really glamorize suffering for some reason. I've never understood why. It's just admirable to suffer. It's like they have competitions about how much they've suffered. Like my grandma's like that. I've suffered more than you, and they're proud of that. They wear it on like a badge of honor, and so they believe we should suffer too. And I know that's a very blunt way of putting it, but it's kind of true. It's just this idea that suffering is glamorized and it's noble. And yeah, as you said, you got to pay your dues. For starters, I think we're suffering a substantial amount more than they are. And I think they refuse to understand that. Because there's almost nowhere, I'm pretty sure there's literally nowhere in Sydney at this point where someone on an average income can just afford to buy a place without getting an inheritance or without getting help from their parents. Now, that's just not fair. Like my grandparents couldn't come to Australia now and buy a place, they own a place. They could never do that now if they were in my generation. And they refuse to understand that. I mean, all the research points to it. All the news articles point to it. Suffering isn't something that you should glamorize. Suffering isn't something you should be proud of. You should be sad that you had to suffer. You should be sad that your children have to suffer. You should be sad that that's how it is. You should instead be fighting to make it better for them. That's how it's always been. That's how, generations always want the best for the next generation. I think it's ridiculous that older generations think that we should just suffer like they did. That's selfish, to be honest with you, especially because we're suffering more than they did. I mean, all the research and every statistic points to the fact that we're suffering more. And I think they're going to be on the wrong side of history if they keep this up. I mean, we know that millennials and Zoomers are becoming much more bigger shares of the voting population. Change is inevitable. Who exactly is going to look after all these older Australians as they age out and we all are forced to move to other places? I don't think they've really thought this through. They seem to think that things are just going to work out for them. But I think, we wait another 10 or 15 years if the problem isn't solved. I think we're going to have a massive nursing crisis. We're going to have a massive education crisis. No one's going to be able to look after anyone.
We'll have robots by then, Sharath. It'll be fine.
We're going to have robots by then. Maybe that's what they think.
Just to play devil's advocate for a moment. Isn't the equivalent of boomers buying in Sydney 30 years ago the equivalent of Gen Ys and Zs buying in somewhere like Maitland today in terms of price, job opportunities, amenity? And I guess Sydney is a different city today than what it was. I mean, we've got Taylor Swift about to play 4 shows in Sydney. I mean, we never had. I mean, we were lucky if we got Cher come out 30 years ago. So. It's a different city, right? It's a more international city. The shops are open on weekends. They weren't open on weekends. They didn't have avocado on toast back then. And, yes. I guess a place like Maitland we might from Sydney think of Maitland as, oh, well, there's not much going on there. That would be, a less desirable place to be.
I was just in Maitland on the weekend. Yeah, I can attest to that. You're right. It's not that much going on.
But they've got a fantastic shopping centre. It's things are going on. And look, I guess what I'm trying to get at here is that they're a very affordable, still very. I mean, maybe relative to the past, it's less affordable in Maitland than it was in Maitland 30 years ago, or 20 years ago, or even 5 years ago. But nonetheless, you can have a reasonable job. You can have a much smaller mortgage, and you can live somewhere like Maitland. And it probably. I haven't done the ratios, but in terms of, average income or median income to median house price, it is probably a lot better than Sydney. So is this not just sort of us, our generation, well, I say our generation, younger people having to suck eggs a little bit and kind of realize that, well, when boomers bought in Sydney, they were buying into the equivalent of somewhere like Maitland. But Maitland now has turned into New York or London. It's become a more vibrant international city.
Well, yeah, I'll be very interested to see if Maitland becomes New York. But anyway, well, my counter to that, back then when boomers made their sacrifice was living somewhere like Kajula, or living somewhere like Liverpool, living somewhere like Castle Hill, Cherrybrook, as Roger just said. Now the sacrifice is moving to rural New South Wales. I think we need to digest that for her. Moving literally out of the city, hundreds of kilometers away. It took us 2 hours to drive to Maitland. So I don't think those are comparable things, because you're moving much further away. Yes, Sydney wasn't a desirable a place 30 years ago. And yes, places like Castle Hill and Cherrybrook weren't as desirable, but they were still only like about an hour's, if not less, drive from the city. They were still, a decent... I don't actually know how long it used to take by public transport to get to the city from Cherrybrook. I'm sure it took much longer than it does now. I mean, they have a metro station now. But yeah, no, those places were still at least somewhat close to the city. Maitland's like a good 3-hour drive away. No one's going to drive 6 hours to and from work each day.
Oh, but people who live in Maitland won't work in Sydney. They would work in... they would have a job up in that part of the world. Maybe they would work in Newcastle, which is much closer to Maitland. So I guess it's there might be different kinds of jobs. They might not be. You might not be an actuary, for example, at a global insurance firm, but maybe you're working in part of the mining sector, or maybe maybe you'll have a job in Newcastle if you're a white collar worker.
I guess my response to that would be, what is it exactly that makes Sydney so vibrant now? Why do we have Taylor Swift coming to perform here? Why do we have, shops actually open past 9 o'clock? Well, it's because of young Australians. It's because we had a population boom, and now we have so many young Australians who can go out. Those young Australians are going to disappear. So we're talking about how Sydney became like the New York. Sydney's now going to go backwards and become the Maitland. And I'm so sorry to keep dissing on Maitland. It's just the example we've chosen. But, Sydney's going to go backwards and become the Maitland if we don't allow young Australians to continue living here. So yes, young Australians can move up to Maitland and they can work in Newcastle or something. But what's going to happen if we just let all the young Australians leave Sydney? What's going to happen is that Sydney's median age is going to continue going up. We're going to get to 50. We're going to get to 60. We're going to get to 70. And we're going to end up with a city where no one's able to look after the older Australians. Parents are not going to be able to see their grandkids. We're going to have massive, you're going to have train stations and metro stations that no one's using because everyone's retired and old. So yes, I understand historically people have moved away, but we shouldn't just do things because that's what historically has always happened. Like just because boomers had to move out to the suburbs 30 years ago doesn't mean that now we should move out to Maitland and to Dubbo and all of those places. Those should still remain options. Like, people still are more than welcome to do that, but that shouldn't be the only option, because otherwise Sydney is literally going to die. If we let that happen, Sydney is literally going to die. No one's going to be able to afford to live here. No one is going to be here to actually look up. I mean, how can a nurse possibly afford to live in this city anymore? They're going to have to, no one's, it's a real crisis, it's a massive crisis. And I think we're really staring down the barrel of a gun here. And I think we've got to start acting really soon. Very soon.
Sharath, can I, for a second, I want to actually tell a personal story of my experience in a suburb where I was a resident, actually. And one of your videos gives a big shout out to it, and that's Lane Cove. I was a resident as a renter and then a property owner for an apartment in Lane Cove for close to a decade.
Wow.
And I have a lot of love for Lane Cove. And it was actually, I was there through the formative period of where a lot of the green areas and marketplace areas that were in one of your videos, and for everyone, please check it out, was created, where there's a lot of that shared area, medium density housing. And
yeah, right.
I don't know if you know particularly the building, but I'm sure you will, given your acumen. But just near their public pool, there was a huge tower that went up on Little Lane, right next to the aquatic center. There's a mixed there's a mixed kind of apartment that went up there with car park and things like that. And I want to tell you a tale of how probably about 60 or 70 NIMBYs were created from this one event. And that is that the apartment block that I lived in was an older school apartment block. And the council approached us. It was a multi-year endeavor, of course, that they were going to transform essentially what was a little car parking spot for the pool.
Yeah, I'm looking at it right now
into
on Google.
a fairly impressive mixed-use, residential, commercial.
It looks beautiful.
Looks beautiful, yeah. And so we actually worked there. I was on the strata board too, and worked with the council to go through all the concerns. All the stuff was done above board. A lot of people trying to support it. But I just want to paint what the reality was, living essentially your window looking into this building and this construction site. So the reality of living next to a site that has to go up is that it's a multi-year process. The initial kind of demolition and excavation is, it sounds okay on paper that it will be over in, the first 10 months or whatever. But what was actually the impact to the residents was a 6-day-a-week, fairly, we're talking like 90 to 100 decibels of noise, frequent coverings of dirt, absolute like congestion into the lane and parking. And there were a lot of downsized retirees there. And actually, I'm actually sad to say that some people, at least 2 of the residents, died in the shadow of that building through the time it took to make it. And they spent their last years, last 18 months of their life covered in noise and dust, and with the constant inconvenience of construction vehicles abusing the times they were meant to be there, which is already very generous. They can work 6 days a week. And the amount of noise and just general kind of disrespect for the residents was absolutely incredible. And this was right. So this is the reality of when you say, yes, in my backyard, like literally in your backyard, having these towers go up is incredible. And I can tell you, we had to invest in getting industrial double glazing to even cope with it. And our balcony was just like ground zero. You couldn't go out there. It was covered in silt every day. And we couldn't do any of that. We had to close it. We welcomed our daughter, our firstborn, into that little apartment. It was stressful, stuff going on all sorts of nights, even though there was many complaints. And I just think that this has to be considered because you've got a bunch of people, a strata board that was willing to work with the situation, could understand what it was, and 100% coverage that they are now NIMBYs. And they'll be telling everyone that they care about to fight as hard as you can because the council says this, the council says that. Once it gets in the hands of the construction and the developers, it just is a total disrespect for the ideals of the idea of peace and enjoyment of your property that you own, right? It was, quite frankly, it was shocking, and most people were just hanging on. And I think that has to be acknowledged, that you can't expect this kind of thing to work if there's not more care being put into the treatment of the people who are impacted that are originally on board with this. So I just thought I'd throw that out there because I think that that's why you see these really polarized view. The people have been through it and they tell people. And the other thing I'll just quickly note is that a lot of people trying to find schools and things in Lane Cove, all these apartments have gone up, but the infrastructure has not kept up, which I know is something close to your heart as well. So I just kind of throw it in there for your comments on what we can do to actually make this more palatable for people actually going through it.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing that anecdote, Roger. And I'm very sorry to hear that. That's what a rotten and disgusting situation. I'm very sorry you guys and your strata board had to suffer through that. Now, I guess, obviously these situations are difficult. How are you meant to deal with all of these, terrible things happening? I guess that's up to councils and governments to try and sort out. Developers shouldn't be allowed to kind of abuse the residents with all this noise, with all this dirt, with all this pain. Maybe there should be compensation considered. Maybe there needs to be better rules. Maybe, don't work at night, don't work past a certain time. Don't even work 6 days a week. Now, of course, that's going to make construction slower, but if that's what will help residents to be appeased, maybe that's what needs to be done. Now, of course, I understand, it's a very difficult situation, and situations and scenarios such as this are what, it's where NIMBYs are born, I guess. But at the end of the day, we still need a way to house more people in this city. We can't just give up. I understand. This is a serious issue. People have suffered, but at the end of the day, something good came out of it. How many people live in that unit? It looks like 200 units, maybe. How many is it?
Yeah, I think it's about 180 actual units. I have a separate story about how how actual occupation rates turned out for that, which was a bit of a slap in the face, given that the apartment actually looked, and most of them are apparently sold, but are empty literally 8 months of the year.
I wonder why.
And sometimes have a few cat scratching posts in there, and that's about it. But that's a separate issue.
Yeah, I wonder why they're empty. That's
well, I can give you a guess. It's bought up by Chinese investors and fairly unoccupied as they're traveling around the place, which is the case with, say, the Dockland Towers in Melbourne.
Yeah, right. Well, that's also something I guess we should look. I won't talk to that because I don't actually know. I'm not going to pretend I know much about what's going on regarding foreign investors and stuff. But at the end of the day, that's still more people who get to live there. Not every unit block is going to be like that. Taken up, mostly empty. A lot of unit blocks are going to be full, especially in places next to train stations. I don't think that the solution here is to this development was terribly built, and it really abused the residents. We should give up and not build anything else. Really, instead, it should be we should keep building. We should keep building apartments and townhouses in density, but we need to bring the community on board more. And this is something a lot of community members are saying. In Ku-ring-gai, people are saying the community needs to be brought on board. Now, we understand that. Us as YIMBYs, we accept that. The community needs to be brought on board. But what we think is very important is we don't think community brought on board should not be code for don't build these towers. Instead, it should be you can build these towers, but please, let us have a bit of peace and quiet. Maybe stop constructing at like whatever time, 9 o'clock at night. Don't build absolutely every single day. Warn us before you're going to build, make a lot of noise or whatever. Don't park your construction vehicles in our places. All of these provisions need to be made. They shouldn't come at the cost of actual housing, though. Because at the end of the day, there's plenty of young Australians who want to live somewhere. I mean, my girlfriend's trying to move out right now. I won't say where, but somewhere in Western Sydney. And it's struggling to do that, even though, she's a student who needs somewhere to live. It shouldn't be difficult to find somewhere, but that's just the reality of how it is. So while some residents, older Australians, are going to have to struggle a little bit, as these developments go up next door to them, they've got to realize that young Australians will, as a result of these developments, have somewhere to live. It's a sacrifice that people have to make. I mean, we right now can't afford to live anyway. So what's the solution? We let, some older Australians enjoy a bit of peace and quiet, and we just all leave the city, and Sydney kind of just ages out and is a city of no grandkids. That's the alternative, I think. So it's kind of, I guess in a way, it's a worst. It's a choice of two evils in a way. I think the supposed evil of building more housing, I think it's a much lesser evil because, putting up with a bit of noise for 18 months, definitely painful. And I don't want to diminish that at all. We need to obviously, figure out what went wrong and why you guys were subject to so much noise and prevent that from happening again. But at the end of the day, the end goal and the end product is more housing and more Australians getting to live here, more parents getting to actually see their grandkids, and, get more children getting to actually stay in the city that they grew up in, maybe even stay in the neighborhoods that they grew up in, families not needing to be separated, people being able to actually live a close distance to their job. These are things that but I do agree we need to consider all of this. Yeah.
So just touching on like the generational aspects of this, which you've touched on, as a spokesperson for younger generations, I'm curious whether you believe people. I mean, you mentioned before about the prospect of lifelong renting. Have younger people just given up on the prospect of the of becoming a homeowner? Is the Australian dream still alive for younger people? And I guess, what are the flow-on effects for that? Because, I think for so long, being able to buy a house has driven so much of Australian society. It's okay, you buy your house, you have your 30-year mortgage, and that means you're wedded to your job. And what are the flow-on consequences? Because you have young people now who potentially aren't thinking about retirement savings, for example, because they don't have that vehicle to store wealth that perhaps previous generations, once had. So just interested in your views on, when you speak to your friends and younger Australians, is there a sense of having given up on the prospect, or are they still clinging on to hope?
I think for many of us, we are still clinging on to hope that things will change. I know I am, because the way I see it, I mean, I don't want to be dark or anything, but boomers aren't going to be around forever. We're a decent amount younger than them, and not just boomers, Gen X. Generations aren't going to be around forever. The housing needs to go somewhere, and it's going to go to us eventually. I would say that many people are slowly starting to give up, though. I mean, while we hope that there's a big transfer of housing towards us, who knows what's going to happen. But we're becoming a bigger voting population, and I think that Australians are going to have to become more comfortable with renting. What are the flow-on effects and implications from that? There probably will be quite a few. There's no longer going to be somewhere for people to store their wealth. The Australian government's going to probably have to, rethink all of that, because a lot of I think super's tied to owning a house or something. A lot of how our society works is assumed that by the time you retire, you already own a house, which isn't going to be the case for a lot of people now. This is why I was talking about earlier, we're going to have to improve renters' rights. A landlord should not be able to just show up unannounced and just inspect a house. A landlord shouldn't be able to just cancel an inspection, because you need to actually make time for that. So if you need to make time for that, landlords should as well. It's very sad that we own a landlord's market. We should really be in a renter's market. It was much better for renters back when that was the case. These are all things we're going to have to consider. And I think the government is going to have to slowly start considering it more and more, because they're not going to win elections if they keep ignoring renters and keep focusing on homeowners.
Okay, can I give you the keys to the castle for a day? So you're dictator for a day. You can change any policy, whether it's at the local, state, or federal government level, but you can only change one policy, one piece of regulation or legislation. What would you change? What would you do as dictator for the day to make housing more affordable for young people?
Oh, that's easy for me. I would just upzone every train station in Sydney. Not just Sydney. It depends on what I'm dictator of. If I'm dictator of Australia or
everything.
All of Australia, every train station upzone. You can build towers as tall as you want right next to the train station. And I understand, infrastructure lag is something that's a very big problem. And I think I forgot to address that, Roger. But of course. I know you said only one policy, but if I could, set aside money to build more schools and stuff, I would do that as well. Schools, hospitals, all of that.
So towers across all the
Yeah, and they don't even need to be towers. They can just be, mid-rise, 3 stories, 4 stories. It could be even shorter, townhouses even.
I've got to say, Cherrybrook Station, we talked about Cherrybrook today. I mean, Roger, when we were out there a couple of months ago, I was just thinking, how is there these big, massive, almost mansions right next to the metro station? This is just crazy.
Yeah. It's revolting. It disgusts me.
To be fair, the metro only just came. So it's the new kid on town. There is big plans for the developments around there, but I think that, to me, I'm kind of more interested in this idea of it's all tied in with the family unit for me, right? And I think that in your YouTube channels and your videos, Sharath, you talk about this idea of apartments not being made for families. And I think that's the bit that I'm really concerned with, because while there are plenty of countries that jam, and I have relatives that live in a lot of these countries that are used to raising families in quite small square meterages and apartments, I think that there are many arguments against that, right? In terms of, and I've been on both sides of the fence, right? Trying to have my kids jammed in a very small space. I've been in some modern apartments and some things like that. And I've been in houses, and I just think that there's only so much realigning your mentality and your kind of principles around living space that you can do with kids. So my question, finally, is when we say it's not set up for families, what are your kind of thoughts on that, right? Like in terms of apartment stocks and making them, it's pretty much impossible to find 3-bedroom with study apartments, right? And that's the least you need, really, in a lot of these cases. What's your view on actually making it a more palatable pill for an actual family to move into these medium and high density apartments?
Well, I think the market is going to dictate that. I mean, as Australians increasingly cannot afford to live in detached houses, they're going to look to apartments. As developers realize that there's more of a market for 3-bedroom apartments, and there's a huge market for 3-bedroom apartments. They'll build more, and Australians will learn because they'll adapt. I mean, over history, people have adapted over and over again. I mean, the internet, we adapted to the internet. I'm sure we can adapt to this as well. And I understand, of course, it's not going to be as palatable. I've acknowledged on my channel that if every young Australian could live in a massive detached house right next to a train station, many of us would. But we're going to all have to make sacrifices. Some older Australians are going to have to put up with some noise next to their houses while there's construction taking place. And some younger Australians are going to have to put up with the fact that they might have to raise an apartment and a family in an apartment. We're all going to have to make sacrifices, but it's for the greater good of the future. I mean, I want my kids to grow up in Sydney. I don't want them to, and that's purely because I have family here and it's where I grow up. It's not because I think the regions are inferior or whatever. I mean, of course, if it comes to that, I would always consider that. But at the end of the day, Sydney is home for me, and that's where I want to raise my kids. We're all going to have to make sacrifices. I think that's kind of the take-home message here. I've heard everything that you guys have said today, and I just think, apartments obviously are, not something that Australians see as a forever home. But I think that's going to have to change if we want to, keep people in the cities that they grew up in and not end up with cities that don't have grandkids.
I think as well, there's a real piece around promoting the benefits of amenity, right? Because
absolutely,
you're living in suburbia. Yes, you might have a detached home and you might have a backyard. You might have space for your, I'm actually just sort of joking that I added my third Weber to the collection, and now I want to buy an offset smoker and all these other toys. So you've got spaces for your toys and stuff, but
you're part of the
you're
problem,
so
Andy.
far away. All right. But you're so far away from everything that makes living in a city worthwhile, right? You're far away from restaurants, shopping, entertainment, work.
Yeah.
And I think people, really selling the story about there's something special about being able to get in a lift and go downstairs to somewhere like, whether you live in Chatswood and you've got the vibrancy of Chatswood, or even, Burwood, or even the city, even to live within the inner city, that this is actually really good. And it's a really good way to live.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely about selling the amenities. I mean, a big part of why our houses have so much space is because it's so bloody far. It takes so bloody long to get anywhere. I mean, Marsden Park, a lot of the big houses there, more and more of them are getting home theaters. Now, why do you think they're putting home theaters into these houses? It's because they all live far away from the cinema, so they can't go to the cinema. Yes, I understand, big houses have more space, but why they have more space is because there's less communal spaces. Houses result in much more antisocial behavior. My local park is always empty because I live in a house, of course. My local shops are pretty quiet. These are things that are not very surprising, but if, they built a few more apartments in these areas, there'd be more vibrancy, there'd be more life. There'd be something called, I can't remember what the word is, but it's something to do with security, basically, observed security or something like that. When you have more people in an area, you feel more comfortable to allow your kids to go home on their own because, there's always an adult watching, instead of walking down a quiet street where there's no one there, walking, for example, through Chatswood. I would trust my kid to walk through Chatswood. I might not trust him. I don't have kids, to be clear, but I would not trust them to, walk through some really quiet place that, they could get lost or something, I guess, no one's watching them, So very much. I've kind of gone off on a tangent here, and I forgot where I was going with this. But basically, it's about teaching people about the amenity. Some people cannot be converted. I hear a lot of the time people are like, "We don't want to become like Chatswood," because it is an ingrained truth to these people. It's a self-sufficient truth that Chatswood sucks. But hopefully they're the minority, because I love Chatswood, and I would love to live there.
Roger, I'll give you the last word. I know you got a hard stop, but I do want to present to you an addition to your. I think you put forward a plan for the Sydney Metro. What some future lines might look like.
Yeah.
I do want to pitch for you the golf course line, which is a metro line that connects all of Sydney's existing golf courses, which are excluded from public access, only enjoyed by a handful of members of golf courses,
rich people,
and turn every golf course in Sydney to a transport-oriented development project connected by new underground metro stations, and maybe that could be the consequences for not opening up that green space to the public.
Oh, absolutely. Because these people who play, they complain about the golf courses, like, where am I meant to go to play golf? And I'm like, in my head, I'm thinking, well, what's the alternative? You'd rather us have to take like 10 hours to get to work every day? Like, you can just drive out to the edge of Sydney, and we can flip the coin, because golf isn't compulsory, but going to work is. Anyway, yeah, I love that idea, Andy. Thank you for suggesting that. Maybe I will make a video about it.
Remote work. So look, Sharath, thanks for coming on. I think that
thanks for having me.
Yeah, you're very welcome. And we are just starting our journey, a little mini series into cost of living, and of course, this is one of the big areas. So we'd love to kind of pick your brain and work with you a bit further on the project. But I think that it's raised a really what I really love seeing about your channel and about the YIMBY movement in general is actually the age of young people, young energy coming up to actually fight for something bigger and for something long lasting. And I think that's really refreshing. Andy and I talk about activism culture and work culture and all sorts of things a lot. And I think that has really become a bit of a divisive topic in the last couple of years, this idea of being passionate about something, wanting social change. And what's so refreshing from the YIMBY movement and your work and everything is that this is exactly what it kind of personifies, this idea of getting involved to get a better outcome, right? And in a really, really nice way, a genuine way. So I really want to give you the chance to kind of leave us with a kind of what we can do, what our listeners can do to find out more, to actually get involved in the movement and and take it from there.
Well, for starters, subscribe to my channel. That would be great. Also, and the channel's building beautifully for anyone who's forgotten.
We'll put links in.
Yes, brilliant. And also, Sydney YIMBY, join Sydney YIMBY. So we're a housing advocacy group. I've already plugged us, but absolutely join. It's $20 for one entire year, or only $5 for an entire year if you're a student or just unemployed. So I'd really strongly recommend you join, because we're literally tonight. It's going to be too late by the time this goes out, but tonight we're running a workshop on how to write submissions to council in support of developments, and that's very important. Work that we're doing, because for too long, councils have heard the voice of the NIMBYs, people who are saying no to development, and we just think instead they need to be hearing yes. So yeah. That's I think that is the most powerful thing a listener can do right now, is join Sydney YIMBY, and let us take care of you. We'll do the rest. We'll figure out, we'll tell you, we'll point you in the direction. We'll be like, you go advocate here, you go advocate there, come along to this, sign this petition, write this submission, But joining Sydney YIMBY is the most powerful thing you can do right now. And you two should join too, by the way.
Oh, we will.
Yeah, we're definitely on the hook now. And look, I've just forgotten one little monologue to end this off, and bear with me. I think, Sharath, I listened to your YouTube video about how you quit medicine halfway through your degree, and your upbringing and part of being part of an Asian culture as well. I've got a lot of parallels, and I think that in this mini series and in this work that we're doing, I'm in product management.
Okay.
But I understand this idea of Asian parents only really wanting a few career paths for you, and the pressure that's put on you. And I think that housing is also one of these very visible tip of the iceberg scenarios. And I want to say to everyone this idea of the path and the pressure that is put out in front of you, whether it's to achieve a certain career, get married, buying that big house with the picket fence, all these things don't blindly follow them. Understand what you want in life. The idea of what success is doesn't mean, getting the house and getting married and being a doctor is going to make your parents happy, or whatever that would mean, because Asian parents are never happy with you. Just kidding. So I think that it's all up in there. I think that the reason that society is going to become unhappy, anxious, depressed are all these things. Don't follow this path that's laid out in front of you. Have a real think about it. And I was very inspired by what you've managed to do and the courage of going against something, a path that was not only laid out for you, but you're already halfway up that mountain. So big hats off to you, and for all the listeners out there, it's not too late. And don't follow things blindly. You don't have to get your third Weber like Andy, or that offset smoker. It's not too late to turn around.
I appreciate that, Roger. Thank you. And yeah, absolutely, it's not too late. Follow your passions, follow your dreams, because at the end of the day, your parents' love is very important, but they will love you no matter what you do. Even if they might hate you for a little bit, you got to follow what you want to do.
Yeah, very true.
That's fine. Thanks, Sharath. Really appreciate you being so generous with your time today. We'll make sure we give a plug to your channel. Although I must admit, your channel is doing very well, so I'm sure it's doing well with or without our support. Yeah, that'll be great. But certainly Sydney YIMBY, because I know we discuss a lot of policy-oriented issues on this podcast, so we encourage all our listeners to get involved.
Great. Thank you for having me.